Sing and they will come. Pretty naughty. Pretty naughty.
Okay,
Dula Prabhu will help you.
Haripriya and Dula Prabhu.
Let Dula Prabhu come. Dula Prabhu will help you.
Prabhu, yesterday you forgot to.
We had a garland.
I made yesterday morning.
I always take the bride off because I can't wear them when I teach.
No, sure, you can bring them down like later.
But it's a nice gesture.
अब देखो ब्लर हो गया, क्लियर हो ही नहीं रहा वो फिर से। आप स्क्रीन के आगे से गए तो ब्लर हो गया, वो तो खैर आपकी गलती नहीं, पर उसके बाद ब्लर ही रह गया ये।
Actually, that's just, it's slow. It takes little time because yesterday, bro, you were done with that thing, then it was coming there. Over there.
No, but that should not happen with this screen because this is the main screen where we are recording.
It's not.
यहाँ पे नहीं होएगा।
It's not.
कभी क्लियर हो रहा है, कभी नहीं।
So it's getting blur and then okay, getting okay, bro.
तो प्रो
Blur. The words.
You mean the visual, not the voice.
Voice should be okay. And I
Can that pick me my voice up?
Oh, let me hear from there, please.
Okay.
It's okay now. It's okay now. I think if you change slides, like once you actually start and you go to the next slide, it'll be fine.
Okay.
Yeah, it'll be okay.
That's a little not as good
Yeah.
definition.
I mean, that's the best we can do, so.
Sing and they will come.
Pretty clear.
Yeah, it's okay, but
Yeah.
it's better. Like this is the next. This is clear letters.
Where is Vijay Gopal Prabhu? Screen actually.
This is fine. It's okay.
Something is
Okay.
wrong with voice.
Voice actually. Vijay Gopal Prabhu is complaining about the voice.
It's not good?
Well, what's he hearing? He's just hearing a bunch of chatter from us.
Yeah, but you got to,
How do you get it?
that's essential that they pick, that your voice.
Yes.
I mean, that's just a waste of.
Right. So there's no mic. There's no mic, so how is it going to be clear?
Yeah, I think it has to be close.
It has to be close.
Well, I think, I don't know.
No, that's good too.
I don't
We can keep it here.
This is what happens.
Because there is no mic.
Or let's just sing. I don't know.
Yeah, they can figure it out. Got it.
Such formalities for a home program.
And
A home
and we
program.
also wanted to be
Okay.
you together.
Together, I'll take one side.
Okay, you get one side, it's heavy, it's like Rama's bow, or Shiva's bow. Hare Krishna, Jai Gopal.
And you.
Oh, I can't wear it. Can you wear it? Yeah, we'll put it around both of you. There you go. Okay, lean in next to Dee. The deities, the deities and the deities. Okay, I sang, but they didn't come. Maybe somebody else should have sung. Anyway, when you're selling, what is Barbara say, when you're selling gold, don't expect many customers.
Yeah. Yeah, that bookstore was crawling with people. How many of them were looking at those treasures on the bottom shelf?
Did they have,
Zero.
did they have some of Prabhupada's books in?
Yeah.
Yeah? Oh, good. Right. All right. So I'm not gonna need that. Here it is. Stop singing and they will come. Maybe that's the big. Jai Prabhuji. Welcome back, folks, to Sri Upadesha Amrita, better known as,
Nectar of Instruction.
right, in plain English. Lesson 2. Who would like to, can you read the screen there? What does it
Yes.
say?
6 unfavorable and 6 favorable acts. Sri Upadesha Matra, text 2 and 3.
Yes, so lesson 2 is another 2 thing. We always have at least 2, because there's 6 lessons, but there's 11 verses, so you have to double up. Plus we had the preface, so yeah, 6 times 2 is 12. Lesson 1 review. Okay, there's the Goswamis. Okay, so I was going to ask a question, but that's part of the review. Yeah, this red light doesn't work. That's the only bad part of the TV. Okay. Lesson 1 review. Recall one point from the preface, either about the importance of attitude or about Srila Rupa Goswami. Who can remember one thing, either about attitude or about Srila Rupa Goswami?
Rupa Goswami was the most empowered by Lord Chaitanya.
Yes, he was directly, yes.
And because of Rupa Goswami, we are called Rupanugas.
Yes, very good. We're followers of Rupa Goswami. How about attitude?
The devotees depends on the attitude. How you
What was the line? It was a famous line in the preface. Advancement
Advancement.
in Krishna consciousness.
depends on
Depends on our
Attitude of the devotee, that's right. We can have an attitude of service or an attitude of defiance, or all things in between. Okay, very good. So that was our quick review. There's many other things, but I just made it very easy. Just one thing. And, okay, there we go. Oh, there's another one. So, Gaur Prabhu, can you read that second one?
Recall one point from text 1 about how to control the urges of the senses.
Yeah, text 1 was all about the urges of the senses, starting with what? Speaking. Vacho Begam.
So by imaging.
So what's, can you remember one thing about how to control the urges of the senses?
By engaging it in devotional service to Lord.
Yeah, that's how you control it. Otherwise, damned if I speak, damned if I don't speak. But if I speak about Krishna.
That was a nice book. Stay tuned and stay high forever
Stay high for
by being in tune with Krishna.
By chanting Hare Krishna, right? Higher taste. Okay, let's go to slides 3 and 4. We're gonna say this verse. We're gonna sing it. Okay, so say after me. Atyahara prayasascha prajalpo niyamagraha janasangascha lauryam cha shadbhir bhaktir vinashyati. There's so few of us, why don't we each sing it? Can you lead us? You want to try saying one line?
Atyaharha prayascha
Atyahara prayasascha
prajalpo niyamograha
prajalpo niyamagraha
janasangascha lavyamcha
janasangascha loryamcha
sadbir bhaktir vinasyati
shadhir bhaktir vinashyati.
Atyahara prayasascha
Atyahara prayasascha
prajalpo niyamagraha
prajalpo niyamagraha
janasangascha loryamcha
Janasangashcha loyam cha.
Shadbir bhaktir vinashyati.
Shadbir bhaktir vinashyati.
Atyahara priyasascha.
Atyahara prayasascha.
Prajalpo niyamagraha.
Prajalpo niyamagraha.
Janasangascha loyamcha.
Janasangashcha loyam cha.
Sadhir bhakti vinashyati.
Shadbir bhaktir vinashyati.
अत्याहार प्रयासश्च
Atyahara prayasascha.
प्रजल्पो नियमाग्रहा
Prajalpo niyamagraha.
जनसङ्गश्च लौल्यं च
Janasangashcha loyam cha.
षड्भिर्भक्तिर्विनश्यति
Shadbir bhaktir vinashyati. Mataji, you came in just in time. Can you lead us?
Give me a minute.
You can read.
I can read.
Oh, okay.
Atyaharas prayasascha.
Atyahara prayasascha.
Prajalpo niyamagara.
Prajalpo niyamagraha.
Janasangascha lolyam cha.
Janasangashcha loyam cha.
Sadhir bhakti vinashyati.
Shadbir bhaktir vinashyati.
Maybe Haripriya can
Once.
Yeah?
No, she said.
Atyara vinashyata.
Vinashyata prayasascha.
Bhajan puriyamata.
Prajalpo niyamagraha. Janasangashcha loyam cha. Shadbir bhaktir vinashyati. All right, you're gonna have to top that.
This one on the screen, it's easy to say, it's the same, it's easier with that.
Which one, this one?
Yeah,
Which one I agree? Okay. Atyahara prayasascha.
Atyahara prayasascha.
Prajalpo niyamagraha.
Prajalpo niyamagraha.
Janasangashcha laulyascha.
Janasangashcha loyam cha.
Bhaktirvinashyati.
Shadbir bhaktir vinashyati. So I think we can all say the translation.
Once
Once
devotional
service is
spoiled,
spoiled,
when
when
it
it
becomes
becomes
too entangled in the following 6 activities, eating more than necessary, or collecting more funds than required, over-endeavoring for mundane things that are very difficult to obtain, talking unnecessarily about mundane subject matters,
And
practicing the scriptural rules and regulations only for the sake of following them and not for the sake of spiritual advancement, or rejecting the rules and regulations of the scriptures and working independently or singly, associating with worldly-minded persons who are not interested in Krishna consciousness and being greedy for mundane achievements.
so you can take those, here, let's go back to one. You can take those translations in different ways. So, does anyone know, or maybe you could just say it from your common sense, common experience. How do you know when you've eaten more than required?
Stomach
The
pain,
stomach
digestion,
The
lethargy.
Sleeping.
Lethargy,
Yeah.
sleeping.
the bodies can
Yes.
start
I
selling.
feel sick.
And when we would ask Prabhupada, how much should we eat? I mean, we were asking him everything, like how much. And Prabhupada would say, usually, eat what you can easily digest. So one rule of thumb, you remember this? Is when you burp,
Yeah, I've heard it. Yeah.
You heard.
Stop, I think probably.
that means you're like, Prabhupada said, Ayurveda means your belly is empty, and then you fill it half with food, or no, a quarter water first, beforehand, sometime beforehand.
Oh,
Quarter water, half food, and that leaves a quarter for air
yeah.
to digest it all. Otherwise, there's no room to digest it when you're walking around like that. Okay, eating more than, or collecting more funds than required. How do you, I mean, for a business person, there's no such thing as more, it's too much, right? So, but for a devotee, even a devotee businessman, how do you know when you're spending too much time collecting?
Means we are not giving our time to the spiritual things
Yeah,
and more things for our business.
right, right. The basis of everything is our sadhana, our hearing and chanting about Krishna, whatever our varna, our occupation. So when we leave no time for that, then that's called prayas, over endeavor. Well, that's the next one actually. I sort of blended it in there. Over endeavoring for mundane things that are very difficult to obtain. So that could be a little tricky to interpret, because there's no such thing as working too hard for Krishna.
Maybe
Right.
like maybe we think like we are spending more time for like getting material things hard. than
Yeah, yeah.
maybe
That's like number one. That's
Yeah, it's like trying to get a $1 million home, but that is really not necessary, but you're overworking, and that's why it says it's difficult to obtain.
what
So
makes
that
it.
is something that may not be within your reach, but you're putting extra effort with the goal to reach that, instead of devoting yourself
Or
to
by
Krishna.
hook or by crook also can be like unfair means.
Unfair, yeah.
But here it only says it's what's difficult to obtain.
Difficult.
So don't set a high goal for the material thing. And if it's too high, then it's difficult to reach.
And it's not really necessary for the service. Like Prabhupada, he worked so long and hard for that Juhu property. It took years for him to wrest it from the crook, Mr. Nair. But he was the only one who didn't give up because of the dirty politics and the crookedness of Mr. Nair. Everybody gave up. All the Prabhupada's best men just would always surrender to Mr. And then Prabhupada, he would never give up. Why? Was he over endeavoring for something that was too
That was
So
not
that
a
was for
mundane
Krishna.
thing.
Not mundane.
That was a
Yeah.
not mundane.
Yeah, that's not mundane.
so good? There you go.
you know that he is doing for Krishna.
Yes.
Yeah, that's the difference. It could take, a long time, but it's really, because Prabhupada saw a property that was going to go, that was going to really be attractive, even though at the time it was just some jungle with snakes and rats. But Prabhupada see it was going to be a big center, a big place, a trendy place. Okay, talking unnecessarily about mundane subject matters. Now, sometimes we study Prabhupada's books, but we're not always just in a bubble or in a library studying Prabhupada's books. And Prabhupada himself, when you heard him, especially on the morning walks, or in the room conversations, or even in class, he would refer to world events. So what made them not mundane subject matters? What made his references to things going on in the world, current events, what made them Krishna conscious?
Because he was connecting them with Krishna.
He was seeing it. He was seeing all these events through the eyes of Scripture. He was giving us what's called Shastra Chakshusha, divine vision. Okay. All right, practicing the scriptural. Okay, here, this is interesting because we're going to spend a lot of time today on the first line, or first word, atyahara, eating more, especially collecting more funds than required. And we're going to look in some depth at number 4. Practicing the scriptural rules and regulations only for the sake of following them and not for the sake of spiritual advancement. Or the flip side, just rejecting the rules out of hand. Oh, that's not practical. So both are can spoil our devotional service. And then associating with worldly minded persons who are not interested in Krishna consciousness. Now we're all the time going out and distributing literature, and we're going out in the world or just working. So what makes that spoil our Krishna consciousness? Because we're not living in a vacuum. We're living in the world. The bhaktas don't retreat to caves or what have you, but they work in the world. So what does it mean associating with worldly minded persons? We're not interested.
Physically we are with them maybe, like mentally we are not with them.
Yeah, that's one way. Right, we might be in the next cubicle over from somebody in an office.
Or as much is needed, like, as much we need for our
Yeah.
work,
Right, right,
get things done, like, not.
right. Or when we go out to distribute literature, we're approaching people. Prabhupada would say things like, I came and no one invited me even. Prabhupada was aggressive. He came to America, not to sightsee, not to see the Grand Canyon or Disney World or whatever. He came to actively approach people. So that was, he was aggressive, but he was aggressive for Krishna. Okay. And being greedy for mundane achievements. So how might that play out in the world for us? Well, how might that spoil us? What's a mundane achievement?
Just
You already mentioned.
Yeah,
name,
that-
fame,
Name, fame, fortune,
Right.
profit, accretion.
just, to be adored in the world, right? Once Prabhupada he was making fun of a picture, I think it was Vivekananda or Ramakrishna, I think it was Ramakrishna, he had a famous picture of Ramakrishna, where he's in front of a pile of gold coins and he's going like this. And he's so renounced, I have nothing to do with that. So Prabhupada, he said, well, you can take a picture of me with a big pile of gold coins in front of me like this. Because he wants it all for Krishna. He's not keeping a pice for himself, a cent, but he wants as much money as possible to print so many books and build centers and so many initiatives he had. Okay, so let's
But
look.
then again, that's not greedy mundane achievements.
That's what I'm saying. That's the difference. Prabhupada said, you can take a picture of me like this. You got to be pure to say that, right? Otherwise, people will think you're greedy. But if you know Prabhupada's consciousness, he wanted it all for Krishna, as his life example showed. Okay, let's look at some more things. So those of you who came a little late, we're looking at 6 unfavorable and 6 favorable activities for Krishna consciousness. All right. Look at this. Hari Priya, who's that? Is that you? Are you on the margin there? You're between the sea and the devil and the deep blue sea, between the sand and the seashores and the sea. A little girl, she's in Jnana Mudra there.
Wow.
Okay, who would like to read? How about Radhika? Can you read?
We are split soul. We are put into marginal because, just like we go on the Pacific beach, someday we find water is covering the beach, and someday we see it is open. There is no water, so that is called marginal. Sometimes it is covered by water, sometimes there is no water.
And that... Oh, there's more. Go ahead.
Similarly, we being marginal potency, we are sometimes influenced by this material nature. Because at the present moment, for some time, we are under the material nature. Now, if we try, then we can get out of this covering of material nature and come to the spiritual nature.
So why are we marginal souls after having read that? You know what marginal means?
Means
Medium.
nada.
In
In the middle.
between two things, right? Yeah, so the little girl, she's between the water and
The land.
the land. She's on the sand there. So what makes us, similarly, what makes us marginal souls?
Because our soul is like part and parcel of Krishna,
Right?
but the body is made of matter.
Right, that's
And
good.
And we associate with the body.
And we what?
We associate ourselves with the
We
body.
identify with the body. So even though even right now we're aspiring Vaishnavas, spiritualists, but sometimes we're inclined toward trying to enjoy separately from Krishna, and sometimes we want to serve Krishna full-heartedly and enjoy it like that. Susukham kartam abhyam. It's everlasting and it's joyfully performed. Okay, so we're marginal souls now. We're embodied souls. That's another way to say it. But even though that's our, as they say, existential condition, that's our situation now, is it that way forever? Is that who we are? We're marginal
No.
beings?
No. Just in the material world.
Huh?
In the material world,
In the material world we are now, but even in this world and in this body, we can cease to be marginal. How?
By taking to Krishna consciousness.
Yeah, and just like Prabhupada would give the example of the iron in the fire. If you put the iron rod in the fire, it might look like iron, but it's acting just like fire. It's no longer. And it's not forever because, can you think of some verses in the Gita where Krishna assures us that we're, how can I say it without giving it away? It's in the 8th chapter where Krishna talks about what happens when you come to me. 8:15 and 18:16. Anybody know? These are famous verses. All right. Anybody know which ones I'm getting at here? This is very encouraging.
Total surrender.
Yeah. So, but I'm looking for some specifics. Encouragement from Krishna to Arjuna. 8:15. Krishna says to Arjuna, after attaining me, the great souls who are yogis in devotion, never return to this temporary world. Once we go back there, we don't come back, which is full of miseries, because they have attained the highest perfection. From the highest planet in the material world down to the lowest, all are places of misery, wherein repeated birth and death take place. But one who attains to my abode, O son of Kunti, never takes birth again. What would be the exception to that?
If you-
Who chooses to come. In Buddhism they call the bodhisattva, enlightened beings who choose to come down to help the suffering souls. Did you ever hear this? This is a one-of-a-kind story. Nobody ever heard this before. There was only 2 witnesses. And Prabhupada never spoke like this. But there was an occasion where Bhavananda Prabhu was in his room in Mayapur, and the late Upendra, his servant. So Prabhupada was talking how, just out of the blue, he said, I did not want to come here, to this nasty place. I did not want to come. But then Krishna said, no, you just go down there and you write those books, and I will make all arrangements. Prabhupada said, I knew it was going to be very austere. Prabhupada never spoke like that. But this one occasion, Upendra, and now this Upendra's disappeared from our vision, so we only have Bhavananda's word for it. But an extraordinary story. So, yeah, so we're marginal now, but when we become on fire with Krishna consciousness, even in this lifetime, we're not really associating with this world. Like Jesus said, be in this world but not of it. And in the Gita it says, as a lotus leaf is untouched by water. So how is a lotus leaf untouched by water? There's 2 ways. You have to become like a lotus untouched by water. How is a lotus aloof from the water? Do you know?
Belief.
Even the lotus grow in water. But
The lotus is sitting on what?
Beliefs.
The pad. We say lily in America, lily pad.
it slips.
And then also, the lotus has a slick covering, right? So everything just rolls. They even say, oh, don't worry about him. He just lets everything roll off his back.
Yeah. It touches, but
Like
it
a
doesn't
duck.
affect it.
Like a duck's back.
Like a duck's,
That's
yeah.
the same principle.
Yeah, yeah. You know, George Harrison, when he was still with us, in 1999, there was a big incident at his estate, Friar Park. Some deranged fan broke in and attacked George with a knife. You remember that?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So it was a very close call because one of the cuts just missed a major artery. And it was only because his wife, Olivia, knocked the guy over the head, knocked him out with a lamp, that George escaped, further attacks. So it took him a while to recover. When he finally recovered, he was ready to face the press, and then they asked him about the experience. So by then, it was close to his disappearance in November '01. He was just talking straight to the press. He wasn't mincing words. He wasn't trying. He didn't have a double identity anymore. His rock and roll friends and his devotee friends. He was just preaching straight. So George said, "Well, you know, this life is very precarious. You know, like a raindrop on a lily leaf." And he was quoting a Vaishnav song. Do you know the song? He was paraphrasing. Hare Krishna. Wow. Bhav Prasad. Anybody know the song? George was quoting a Vaishnav poet that Prabhupada would sing this song a lot. Anybody know? Bhaja Hooray. Kamala Jala, that's the line. Kamala Jala Dala. Jivana. Life, Jiva is as precarious as a rain, as water on a lotus, lily leaf. So, that's true. But when we become absorbed in Krishna, and then even in this world, everything is happy place. Okay, now, so what do I say at the end of that? As marginal souls, we can make good choices, or we can make bad choices. We can go either way. That's what it means to be marginal. Bad choices cripple our minds. So, who's going to read that one? Arun Prabhu, can you read that?
Cripple-minded souls, such mentally crippled do not are put under control of the Lord's external potency, Mahamaya, whose business is to subject them to influence of threefold miseries.
So we all know the name Mahatma Gandhi. Mahatma, great soul, right? People say Mahatma, great soul. Now the opposite of that is Duratma. Of course, no soul is bad, but we can become bad by covering ourselves with lower modes of nature. So when we do that, let's see here. Yes. Misery. So when we make bad choices, then we have to suffer the karma, and it's not pretty. You know, it's very painful, as the federal workers experienced during the recent shutdown. They missed 2 paychecks, and they were starving. So there's consequences for our choices. Let's look at those miseries. Bodily and mental. Lady has a pain in the neck. That's what we say. Material life is a pain in the neck, right? Literally. And then she's got a headache, or some mental distress. That's even worse.
Even a small problem with the body, like it takes the toll actually too.
Right.
It's nothing.
Yeah, that was one of the amazing things about Prabhupada. He was always, his body was always suffering some malady because he was in an elderly body, but he was pushing himself. He was at a breakneck pace, but he wouldn't let on. He would just tolerate it. And then only when it got really out of hand did people notice, oh, Prabhupada, he's got a really bad toothache, or he's been pushing himself, he has to stay in one place for a few days. Okay, bodily and mental miseries. They don't look like terrorists, do they? Look like buffoons, but that's the idea. They're supposed to be the bad guys. Kind of looks like some play. And what's the last one? Miseries from
Demigod.
Mind.
Demigod.
body and mind, we already did.
Demigod.
Daiva, right. Miseries from natural calamities. Look at this. Whoa. Anybody ever seen the movie Twister? That was really, yeah, look, those things are wild. You get inside one of those things and everything goes. Wind. But it's just the wind. It's just one of Krishna's energies, Vayu. And how about fire? California was in the grip of so many fires, and it's becoming the new normal out there. It's just so dry and so hot. You're going to have to expect that with the climate warming. And then you have water. Manda wave. Tsunami about to engulf. And then earth, we didn't even show earthquake. Earthquake, can you imagine the earth opening up beneath you? The good old terra firma, which means, firm earth, solid land. Everybody thinks they're walking on something, and then all of a sudden, was anybody ever in an earthquake? Where?
In India.
In India, where?
Yeah, Himalayas.
Himalaya,
Yes.
really?
Earthquake.
What part?
It's near Roorkee, Dehradun area.
Dehradun.
Yeah.
Wow.
We eat.
Was it, did it open up in front of you or?
No,
what?
it was just a minor
Minor tremor.
shaking, yeah, but you can feel it, yeah.
Yeah.
You're very terrified.
Actually, bro, the whole of northern India is kind of in that
Fault area.
Yeah.
in that area. fault
Yeah.
area.
Uh-huh. Well,
Like
similarly,
Eastern Knoxville has had 4 or 5 in December, January period.
in the
Minor
same
ones.
area?
I felt
This-
little.
in this area.
Yeah.
I felt
You
little,
did, right?
little,
Yeah.
just little ones.
East
Around here?
Knoxville.
Yeah, I've experienced it in Hawaii, and the biggest one was in Los Angeles, because the whole California is on the San Andreas Fault, you know, all the
Yeah.
way down South America, actually, and it was wild. I mean, it wasn't even big. It was just all of a sudden, the walls are moving, and it's surreal when you actually are inside it. Because you think this is solid. And all of a sudden, everything's flying around, and under your feet is a world. I was giving a class in Hawaii, a Bhagavatam class, and all of a sudden, the building started swaying. And for a whole day, we were like without power, because they were afraid they had to cut the water and the gas and all this stuff. So these are miseries of material nature coming as consequences of our activities, trying to compete with Lord Krishna. Once there was a tornado, right? I used to live in Prabhupada Village in Sandy Ridge, North Carolina. So they get tornadoes coming through there. And one tornado, it completely devastated this one town, ironically named Eden. E-D-E-N, like the guys in the Garden of Eden. So it just came through and just ripped everything to shreds. So the locals, who were very pious Christian people, there was the Steele brothers. They were the local car mechanics. They fixed our cars. So they were saying to us, the Lord doesn't like what they did over in Eden, because they were always clear cutting the trees. They weren't selectively harvesting the trees. They were just, mowing them down just for profit, just for short-term profit, without any thought to the health of the forest. So they had a sense of karma, consequence, of sowing what you reap. Okay, natural disasters. Let's see here. And now, okay, so how to avoid the 6 unfavorable activities or attitudes? Because this is all about the don'ts, and you're going to see more. We're going to take a look at why we're focusing on the don'ts more later. How to avoid the 6 unfavorable. Let's look at those activities. Yeah, this one. Okay, how about Radha? Can you read that?
In the material world, one has to work for the maintenance of the body and soul. But how can one perform such work in a way that is favorable for the execution of Krishna consciousness?
Mm-hmm. So usually, just like right now we're breathing. So just by the virtue of the fact that we're breathing, we're killing so many living entities. We can't avoid killing in this world. What is it? How does it start? Jalajal Navalakani. The last line is Jivo, Jivasya Jivanam. That means one living entity in this world is food, or lives at the expense of another. We can't help that. So, so how do you live without getting consequences? So that's the art of living, and that's Krishna consciousness. Let's look at the next slide here. It's connected with that. I'm just trying to find where I am here. All right. Yeah. Okay. Well, I just have a note here. Human life is meant for plain living and high thinking. That's Prabhupada. Oh, this is in Nectar Instruction. And he says, in the material world, one has to work for the maintenance of the body and soul. But how can one perform such work in a way that is favorable for the execution of Krishna consciousness? Okay, that's what we just had up there. So let's look at the next slide for a solution. Avoiding atyahara. So we're going to focus on 2 of those 6 don'ts, because they're especially destructive. What, does anybody remember what atyahara is, first of all?
Overeating.
Overeating or accumulating. Accumulating more than is required. And that's the tendency in this world, is to just accumulate more than we need. So how do we avoid that? Okay, how about Maraji?
Religion entails understanding the law of God, because the proper execution of these laws ultimately leads one out of material entanglement. That is the true purpose of religion. Unfortunately, people accept religion for material prosperity because of atyahara, or an excessive desire for such prosperity.
Right. We take God in the material world, it's like a supreme Santa Claus. We take him as an order supplier. Well, when we pray to God in this world, how do people usually pray? Gimme, gimme, gimme. It's a gimme thing. And God becomes like the Santa Claus. That's not religion, but that's how people take it. In fact, when Trump was running for president, one of his supporters was a lady who was famous for, they call it prosperity theology. That means if you're rich and famous, that's a sign that you're favored by God. That's how she takes it. Sure, if we have a lot of money, or we're good looking, or we have a lot of education, or we have good family, or whatever, that's some kind of karma coming from the past. But the real favor of God is when he brings us closer to him. Because generally when we have those things, that's what Queen Kunti says, those people who have education, bodily beauty, wealth, fame, they can't pray to you with sincere feeling. Those are almost like curses. Ambarish Prabhu, the great-grandson of Henry Ford, once said to me in Mayapur, he said, Sureshwar, if I have to come back again, I don't want to be wealthy. Because everybody's chasing, and it sounds strange, doesn't it? Because everybody's chasing money. If I only had, $1 million or $1 billion, it never ends. So, but why do you think Ambarish said that? I don't want to be wealthy again, like a Ford. Because what happens if you have a lot of money?
Everyone just wears you out.
Everyone's in your pocket. And you don't know why people are approaching you. Is it just because of my money? Well, probably it is, right? But there's a funny story. You know the story when Prabhupada had finished writing the Krishna book in 1970, but he didn't have the money to publish it.
Tell that in detail, will you? I love this story.
So that was right around the time when the famous musician George Harrison, again George, he comes into my talks a lot, because he brought me to Krishna, his music. So he was coming to Krishna consciousness, and he really liked Srila Prabhupada. So Prabhupada had the book finished, and the artists had finished the paintings. They just needed the funds to print it. And in those days, in 1970, it was going to cost $19,000. It sounds like nothing today, but it was going to cost to print so many copies. So Prabhupada was in England with the devotees to launch Sri Sri Radha Ishwar and the Berry Place Temple. And Prabhupada said to Shyam Sundar one day, George's friend, Shyam Sundar, I want you to ask George for the money to print this Krishna book. And when soon as Shyam Sundar heard that, he thought, oh no. Because one reason that Shyam Sundar was such a good friend of George's is because he never asked George for anything. He let George volunteer whatever he could do. And he already had given a lot. He already had co-signed the loan on the Berry Place Temple. It was only because George Harrison's name was on the deed, or whatever you call it, that they agreed to give the devotees the temple, because they knew George was wealthy. And he donated so many things, and of course his time, and then the record they made. So Shyam Sundar said, Srila Prabhupada, I never ask George for anything, because everybody's asking the Beatles for everything, and especially if I do this, then it's going to really hurt my relationship. But Prabhupada kept insisting, don't worry, Krishna will help you. Krishna, do you know this story?
No, I don't.
Oh, okay. Well, it's pretty miraculous. And it's told in different ways by different people in different books. But so George was invited to the home of a famous person in England named David Wynne, who was the sculptor laureate of England. He would sculpt the busts of the Queen, and he was a really aristocratic guy. And he liked George. They had a good relationship. So George said, "Hey, Shyam, why don't you come to the dinner with me, with David, you know?" So they go to this fancy house, and all the finery, and the you know, he was vegetarian too. And so the whole time though, Shyam Sundar was total anxiety. It's kind of spoiled his appetite, because he's thinking, how am I ever going to do this, you know? And there was even one or two occasions before then when he tried it, but he couldn't do it. But this was the third time. So it was like, he was hoping three's a charm, you know, that it's do or die, I gotta ask George. So, so they were at the dinner table, and they had a nice meal, and then Shyam Sundar's thinking, okay, it's now or never. And he just says, George, Srila Prabhupada, and George likes Prabhupada, so that was okay so far. George, Srila Prabhupada, that was nothing wrong with those words. Srila Prabhupada has just finished writing the Krishna book, and he would like to know if you could help print it. So as soon as, and he didn't even ask, he didn't tell the price or anything. But Shyam said as soon as he said that, he could see George's whole face change. Like, oh no, here's another one. That's all they want. You know, they get your confidence, they win you, and then they pop the question about the money, right? So George is like, you know, just completely silent and disgusted. And then as soon as that happens, as soon as a big lightning bolt hit the house, and knocked out all the power. It was like, boom! And, well actually, yeah, that's right, that's the sequence. And it was so shocking that they all dove under the table. Because, you know, if you've ever been in an electrical storm, sometimes it's so shocking that it throws you. I've been thrown, you know, just by the vibration. So they all are under the table, and it's pitch black. It's pitch black. And they're all there, kind of huddling and wondering what's going to happen next. But then, luckily, in a few minutes, the lights went on. And they were all still under the table. And Shyam Sundar said, and I looked at George, and he had a big grin on his face. He had a big grin on his face. And he said, there's different ways it's told, but he said, well, what can I say after that? This is too much. In other words, he saw it as Krishna. Boom! The question was popped, and then George is thinking of his bank balance, and then Krishna just shows that, yeah, do it. Right? Boom! And he said yes. Well, actually, all he